that's a shame. Okay, thank you all for being here. It's really an honor to be a part of this. I think really important things are happening here. And I think we don't talk about cool concepts or cool designs, but there's an extra layer, and I think that's really important. And I would like to thank Kyoorius for the invitation and the hospitality. So, this is me. And for the people in the back, this is me. This is how I feel right now. I'm a bit nervous. So please be gentle. But afterwards, I will look like this. Who is familiar with my work? That's not a lot. That's good. What I like about Instagram is the timeline, because you can really see the process and development of someone. So I want to scroll through this quickly. You see, I started this account 5 or 6 years ago. There's a lot of typography and vector lettering, but like slowly but steady, I'm transitioning more into 3D illustration. Still a lot of type. There's some more illustration coming in, and slowly but steady you see the vector lettering I've been doing is disappearing. And I also switched from the use of Illustrator, so vector illustration, I'm switching more to 3D. And this is where we are right now. I made this quick animation as a celebration to be here. I want to show some projects because I think it's important to have a little background of what I do, so my story makes sense. This is the first project I want to talk about. It's about skateboarding. I really like the rhythm, the textures, and the dynamic shapes and of skateboarding, but I don't have the guts anymore to go on the deck. So I put that energy in a series of illustrations. And this is an important piece for me because there are a lot of things in this project that I really love. And one thing is the storytelling, and another thing is the visual style. So the textures and the dynamics. But also the storytelling is important to me because I've been doing like a lot of icon-based storytelling, and even though that's fun, it's also fun to do and approach it differently. So it's a series of 6. This is a piece I did for a festival, Retail and Brands Festival. And I show this because it became a really important piece. It gave me a lot of insights, but I will talk about that later. The third and last project that I want to show right now is called Power of the Mind. I've always been fascinated by the idea that you can change a situation by changing the way you think about it. And based on that thought and based on that fascination, I made a series of 4 quick animations. So this one is based on like a famous saying, when life gives you lemons. And so the shape in the middle becomes the portal, and that's basically representing the power of the mind. This second one is about freedom. And what I think is interesting about freedom is how much is like physically and how much is mentally. because you can be free to go everywhere, but you can still feel present, and also the other way around. The third one is about time. I think time is very interesting as well. We always think we don't have much time. But basically, we have all the time of the world until we die. But, you know, nobody knows really what happens afterwards. And this is the last one. It's based on a Dutch saying. The saying is, behind the clouds the sun is always shining. I'm not sure if it's an English saying as well. So, we have this theme. I think everybody heard about the theme already. Oh, that was too quick. So I got this description, and I had to reread this a couple of times before I really understood it, but I think it's a really interesting approach. And, you know, I started to think about it, and I started to think about it on a very personal level. And I started to think about, you know, what illustration and design was for me, and why I was doing these things. And then I was thinking about it, what am I going to talk about? And then this sentence stood out. Without gaps, design would suffer an existential crisis. And then I almost suffered an existential crisis. Because I started thinking, why am I doing this line of work? And what are gaps to me? And then after thinking maybe a little bit too much, it occurred to me that I encountered quite some gaps. And gaps I had to bridge, gaps I had to overcome. And I think it's interesting because any one of you will have to encounter gaps. And most of the times, it's about the difference between the current situation and the desired situation. So let's talk about these gaps. For me, the first one that I thought about was this one. Skills. So you have skills, but you want more skills. So I studied graphic design, and this is what I was doing. And maybe it's not even that bad, considering that I didn't really know Photoshop or anything, but I was doing this, and at the same time, a lot of cool stuff was coming out. You had, like, I think this is around 2010, and I think the 3D trend started. And I saw all this great stuff, and I was doing this. And I saw that this wasn't that good, as interesting and as strong and as good as what was coming out. And I didn't understand, how could people do all this cool 3D stuff and now Photoshop, and that's what it was to me. So I had this realization, and it was time that I, oh, that was too quick, that I needed to learn more and learn again. And around that time, when I was thinking about all this, I really want to see New York City. And then I realized I can combine those two. So I approached an agency there called Volt 49, and I asked if I could do an internship. And yeah, they invited me over, so I went to, yes, New York City. Pretty crowded. It was really interesting for me to be there, because I learned a lot. I was totally unaware of, you know, the whole advertising industry, and there was such thing as, you know, cool, good-looking advertising projects. And that's what I saw there. And it was really a blessing for me working with talented people. My desk buddy, Karan, who spoke yesterday, I mean, imagine what happens if you sit like a talented guy like that. So that was really good. And the whole studio was filled with amazing creative people. So I learned a lot. I learned really quickly. But after a year, the projects I was doing at the agency weren't really satisfying anymore. I felt that I had more potential than I was able to show on the job, and they couldn't change the job description, so I decided to go back to the Netherlands. So I went back to the Netherlands and started freelancing again. And I want to show these because for me these illustrate the progress I made and the things that happened. So these on the left, on the left, I made this artwork for a festival called Paperclip, and that was before I went to New York. And then this one on the right was the first edition I did after I came back. And what's interesting for me is that there's a huge difference between like quality. Like I tried to do some 3D here with vector, which looks ridiculous to me now. And so for me it was really important. For me I really bridged the gap, and I think you can also see that this thing is a starting point for the stuff that I'm making right now. So, there are some other gaps, of course. For me, I think getting out of your comfort zone, working in different media and techniques can be really helpful. It can give you a lot of good insights which you can apply to the things you really love. So, this is a project I want to show. I made it together with my girlfriend, Anna Babe, who's also here. She's a talented papercraft artist. And so I work mostly in CGI, but this project was done in paper. And, you know, switching from the computer to something handcrafted, photographed, like really built, that was interesting. And I think one interesting insight was, you know, what shapes do. Like the same shape in a different medium or technique or craft is a different thing. So here on the left, that's the kind of shapes I was making, playing around in Vector and Illustrator. And then if I would take them to 3D, the CGI, they start to look like that. What you can see in the middle. And then I like these shapes. But then we were doing this papercraft project, and this is almost impossible to achieve. So, working in paper, we had a limitation, and we could just like extrude, so give depth to a silhouette, and so these things happened. But I would have never thought that it would look cool, because I thought the more dimensional, the more fun. But I think the outcome, the result was really satisfying, and it actually became one of my favorite projects of last year. And I think that was really important to me to realize that sometimes I just have to step out of my comfort zone to be able to learn new things and find fun. This is another project where I switched craft and I designed these lamps for a friend of mine. It are lamps. They are being produced at the moment. And what was interesting about this is he has a design label, and he kept asking me, why don't you design a lamp or a chair or a piece of furniture? And I was like, no, I work in 2D, or like my end result's always flat, so why would I even try? But he kept pushing me, and at some point, you know, I realized, okay, maybe it's good to get out of my comfort zone and see what happens if I design a lamp. So I designed a lamp. And I think that was really fun as well for me to see if I bridge these gaps between different media or techniques or styles, interesting things happen. And even these lamps, they mean a lot to me, because I think they are the end result of, you know, getting out of my safe world and my safe zone. And this is another one. Here I bridge a gap between crafts that I really enjoyed. And you know, as you saw on my Instagram, I did a lot of vector lettering. I really love doing those, but I really didn't like the projects. So when I got more illustration commissions, like the vector lettering disappeared. I mean, you saw that slowly but steady. I was only doing illustration. So these are some of these projects, and around that time I co-founded High on Type. High on Type is a collective of type lovers, and I did it together with Vincent de Boer and Guido de Boer. If you're into type, you need to know them. And so I switched more to illustration, and they kept going. They're like really good calligraphers and hand letterers. And so I was more into illustration, and then at some point I was still helping with the festival and some side things. But at some point they were doing a festival and they wanted to do an exhibition. And they asked me for the exhibition, like, can you design a poster? And the framework was, it needs to have an alphabet, of course, and it's going to be screen printed in one color, black and white. And I really didn't know what to do, because all the 3D type I saw at that time, it wasn't about lettered shapes, right? So all the 3D type coming out at that time, it was all about textures. So letters would be built out of elements, and all those elements would tell the story. And or another thing you saw many times was that if the word said hamburger, for example, the type was made out of meat or hamburger. And that was interesting, but I didn't like to do it because I like to focus on the shapes of letters and the rhythm. But I didn't know how to combine these two things. But for this festival, I was kind of forced to make a poster. And so I made this poster. And for me, I started to explore letter shapes based on geometric forms. And I started to look for, the tension between abstractness and readability. And so I made this poster, and this became a really important piece for me as well, because I finally bridged the gap between my vector lettering and my 3D illustration. And I like this, and then I made this. I made a colored version, and around that time I switched to a different render engine, which made animation possible for me. So this was a really fun thing and exploration, and I really got the hang of it. And I realized that every time I bridge a gap, I have the feeling that I take steps forward, and the work I do becomes more me. So that brings me to the next subject, and that's last year. Last year was a really interesting one. Around March, I was almost bankrupt. So imagine you've been working on something for 10 years. You went to a different country to, gain more skills, and then no commissions come in. And that was really terrible. And my ego had a rough time, because I was working on something for 10 years, and then I had to apply for jobs, and there's nothing wrong with getting a job, but if you don't want a job and you want to freelance, then it sucks. So I was in a situation looking for jobs, and then suddenly it turned around, like completely the opposite. So in 1 week I got like 3 commissions, and actually the biggest ones I ever had, and I'm now fully booked until the end of the year, which is something I have never experienced. So there was a huge gap, like almost bankrupt to really busy. And I think that's interesting. Like, what happened there? How did I bridge that gap? And I think it's interesting as well because I know that every creative, every artist, student or professional is struggling with these things. And the funny thing is, nobody sees it. Nobody sees what's really going on because we don't show it online. I'm not going to put on my Instagram, hey, I'm out of money. You know, that's a problem because I think a lot of people struggle with these things, and so it was really difficult for me. And you know, let's look at these gaps. So, looking back, I realized that I was out of balance. And I mean, you see here, if you're out of balance, the gap becomes more difficult. So a gap becomes more difficult to bridge or overcome. And, you know, there were quite some gaps I had to overcome, and that's, you know, difficult if you're not in balance. And there were some personal gaps. I was almost burned out. There were some professional gaps. I wasn't really enjoying the work I was making, and I started to get like jealous feelings when I looked at other people's work, and I think that's your cue that you need to change something. And of course we had the gap, the financial one, that there's more money going out than coming in. And you know, because of all these things, I really lost fun in my job, and you know, jobs stopped coming in, and it was terrible at the time. Does any one of you recognize this? Not many. And it's a nice therapeutic session for me. Okay, so I forgot to play, I forgot to have fun, I was just working hard, I was taking my work too seriously, there was a social pressure, and you know, I really lost focus of why I'm doing what I do. You know, and at some point, I had a nice buffer, I had some money, but after all these slow months, it was all gone. And then I got this insight. The insight that was really important to me. We don't own or control anything. We think we have stuff. I thought I had money, I thought I had a career, but it basically stopped. And that insight that you don't have anything, so you don't need to grasp for it, was really important. Because I could let go a lot of frustration knowing that I don't have or control anything. So that was really a relaxing thought and insight. So that was step one, I guess. And, you know, getting more in balance, that insight that made me more relaxed, I could work on bridging the gaps. And I want to share some insights of what I did, because maybe they help you. So the first insight for me was when I was working, I was just like ticking off lists. I mean, everybody, I think most people have like a to-do list. And when I was working on an illustration, I had this list, and I just want to tick it off. And that was a problem, because ticking off lists made me forget that it was all about fun. And that's why the illustration I showed was important. So I do quite some projects that are storytelling based on icons. And so you have to make the same icons over and over. And that's where I lost my interest as well. Like, if it was music on a festival, they wanted musical notes. And of course I tried to suggest different things, but sometimes you just can't get around it. Or if it was about creativity, they really wanted a lamp, and I think that's not really creative, but you know, sometimes you can't get around it. And what I realized, I got this project that I showed you, and they wanted musical notes and a lamp, so I opened up an old file, and I copied the musical notes, put it in a new file, I copied the lamp, and then I was like, that's boring. I'm copying myself. That's even more boring as copying someone else. And so I needed to find something to bring the fun back. And I did that by, you know, I wanted, every time I need to make an icon, I'm going to make it from scratch. And at the time, I wanted to make my visuals or my illustrations a bit more abstract, just to play around. And so I made these musical notes and these lamps, and that was really important for me to realize that I can make jobs fun. Like, it's not about the briefing or the client only. I had the power to make a job fun again. So that was really important. I had to have fun and play more. And one of these things, like, I have to make a lot of clouds. And if you have this list with like a bunch of elements you have to make, you start to tick them off. So you make a cloud and then you done. But I lost my fun because of that. So now every time I have to make something, I try a couple of versions and I play around, and that was a key insight. I wanted to play and experiment more, and this is also a thing. Like, I've been working on some blockchain projects, and blockchain is about networks and nodes are always displayed as a cylinder. And so if the client says we want to display a network and nodes, we're like, okay, let me play around with the shape of the node. So I just play around and I made all these, and there were a bunch more. In the end, the client said, yeah, it needs to be nodes, or it needs to be cylinders. So sometimes you cannot get around it, but at least I had fun because I did this. And so the first thing was ticking off lists, and the second important insight was about time management. I got really frustrated, and I want to make more things, and I see all these things coming out online and people that are really productive, and like, how can they do that? I need to work more, I need to step up my game, put in more hours. But then at the moment that I was like looking for jobs, I didn't have any commissions to work on, but I was like spending all my time on emails, meetings, Skype calls, all these things. And in that time, it was maybe a period of 2 or 3 weeks that I was doing this. And I only had 4 or 5 hours to work on something, to really create, to really illustrate something. And in that time, I made these 2 pieces. And that was really interesting because I love them both. And they are really important to me because this left one gave me a lot of insights about, you know, how I like typography in a combination with 3D. So this one gave some fun back. And this right one was important because it actually led to one of the biggest commissions I ever had. So then I realized it's not about putting a lot of time or a lot of hours into something. It's about work when you feel happy and, you know, you work more efficient. So that time management thing became really important. It took away a lot of stress. You know, I didn't force myself anymore to work every weekend, to work every night, because I realized it's not about the amount of hours, but the quality of the hours. And this was the third insight. It's really difficult to change the type of projects you're asked for. Like I said, I've been asked for a lot of illustrations that are where the storytelling is based on icons. And you know, of course, I can change that, but it'll take quite some time. And for me, I realized, okay, I don't think that way of storytelling interests me as much anymore. But how can we play around with this storytelling? And so then this happened. I was asked to send some pictures for an interview, and instead of like making the same and taking the same pictures of someone sitting behind his desk or behind some paper, you know, illustrating, I was like, okay, I need to go to the supermarket, and Anna was with me, and of course she kept photograph, and we decided to do the shoot in the supermarket. And we didn't have any idea or clue what to do, but we just started, and this happened, and it made me very happy, it made Anna very happy, and I think a lot of people really enjoyed seeing these photos. So for me, that was a really important insight. I could play around with storytelling in my own projects, and even also outside of my own craft of CGI and 3D illustration. We made an Instagram for that, if you like. And this is another one we did, and it started out very organically. I woke up, and I do have a pink shirt and pink shorts and a pink cup, and I was walking around. I actually wear pink, how you say it, sloffen, boots. So I was like, maybe it's fun to make some pictures. So Anna made some pictures, we did a quick shoot. When my coffee was done, the shoot was done, so okay, that was fun. And then we were looking at the pictures, and I tried to make a series out of it, but I picked the best 3, and there were these 3, but they weren't really a series because this one stood out, obviously. But then, looking at that, I saw this story about social media. The story like, this is reality. I just woke up, but this is what I would show. When you post a picture on Facebook or Instagram, nobody will show that. And for me, that became really important. It was a really important insight, because who of you like social media? Who loves it? Nobody? Okay, who hates it? And who has both that feelings, love and hate? There you go. So I feel the same way, like social media is really awesome, but it's also really terrible at the same time. It's a motivation because you see cool work and it inspires you to create cool work yourself. So that's the good part, but it can also really demotivate. It started to demotivate me because I started to measure the quality of the work in likes. So if a post would get a lot of likes, I confused that for, that's a really good post, that's a really good piece. And I think realizing that that's definitely not the case, that's when I realized that it's also really demotivating. And social media is like a curated reality, and it's interesting to realize there's a huge gap between what is really going on in our lives and what we show online. And we wear these masks, and at some point we really don't know what's really going on anymore. And yeah, this brings me to the end of my presentation. Like, it was really interesting to do this, or to make this presentation, because I realized that I need to bridge and overcome gaps to make things fun again. And you know, bridging these gaps forces me to keep evolving as an artist. But I think more important, bridging these gaps evolves me as a human being, and I think that's the most important thing. Thank you.